Hello and welcome to the Energetics of Astrology overview for the Cancer solar cycle June 20th through July 22nd, 2021. This is Shelley and I want to wish all of you Cancer sun sign people a very happy birthday. In this video, we will be looking at the energetics of the sign of Cancer, body, mind, and soul, as well as the planetary transits taking place during this solar cycle. And rather than providing tips on how to work with the various planetary energies in this video, I'm going to focus on Cancer's ruling planet, the moon, and we will look at the lunar phases and how to determine your own natal moon phase. So let's begin by covering some basic information that describes the nurturing, protective, and feeling-oriented sign of Cancer. It is the fourth sign of the natural zodiac and the first represented by the water element. Cancer is appropriately associated with the crab. Crabs are sensitive and active creatures with complex behavior patterns that live both in the water and on land. Many varieties can walk sideways, forwards, and backwards. This correlates with Cancer's association to past, present, and future generations of our lineage, as well as their ability to move in any direction, especially to stay out of harm's way. Crabs are peace-loving creatures that would rather get out of the way or hide than engage in battle. They don't fight unless there's no other choice. Instead, they pull their soft bodies into their protective shells. When forced to fight, especially if their offspring is in danger, they are well equipped to hold their own. The sign of Cancer is associated with our family of origin, the family we create, what we ground or root into, the mother archetype, childhood, and raw, direct emotions. As a water sign, Cancer feels what it feels way more than what is verbally communicated. This level of vulnerability and sensitivity is required for healing, regeneration, recovery, and growth. Like the crab, as Cancer grows and matures, their shells do not. In order to grow, they must risk the state of complete vulnerability to shed old shells and grow new ones, typically hanging out into their burrows, until the new shell is fortified. The cardinal sign of Cancer is ruled by the moon, and like the moon, Cancer reinvents itself time and again. During metamorphosis, Cancer goes within until ready to reemerge whole and protected. Its cardinal modality lends itself to beginning all kinds of projects, whether it's redecorating the living room or taking in a lost puppy. Cancer always seems to have a lot going on. It can be a great multitasker so long as it takes time for self-care. Its qualities are cold, moist, and nourishing. Intuitive, sensitive, and receptive qualities are front and center for all the water signs, and for Cancer, like the mother archetype, it can be loving, nurturing, caring, protective, as well as devouring, absent, or overbearing. Most Cancer folks are so creatively fertile, so it's no surprise that this sign is also associated with arts and crafts. So now let's look at the body areas that Cancer rules. Cancer correlates with the protective and or nurturing spaces in our bodies that store, ripen, process, or grow things until they are ready to be released, such as the womb, the female breast. It also protects what is vital, such as the mucosa or the pleura, or like even the fatty protection of the eyes. Cancer in the moon also correlates with digestion and, you may have guessed it, emotional eating. So these are some of the body parts that Cancer rules: the breast, the chest cavity, stomach, uterus, ovaries, and testes, the mucosa membrane, the bodily fluids, along with Pisces and Scorpio, our body's containers, the protective coverings, the hormonal function, and digestion, specifically upper digestion. So the mental or psychological functions of the sign of Cancer deal a lot with our emotional security needs. And as we all have the sign of Cancer in our charts, we have likely encountered most, if not all, of these vibrations. So when feeling safe and secure, our emotions are flowing, and our own Cancer energy may be expressed through some of these higher vibrations, through nurturing, caring, protecting the ones we love, through understanding, being rooted or grounded, being imaginative and intuitive, through our affection, through our fierce, loving nature, through security and empathy, through loyalty, and through our instinct. And the lower vibrations of Cancer can kick in when we feel we or a loved one is threatened or unsafe. So there can be moodiness, anxiety, being neglectful, needy, being stuck in the past, feeling helpless, closed off, playing it safe, smothering, touchy, dependent, insecure, repressing our emotions, or being overly emotionally reactive. So, in the center are some mantras that really help stabilize the Cancer archetype in each of us. First one, security comes from within. The second one, you are not your past. The third one, commit, that says yo, it should say commit to your own self care, self love, and self respect. So, the Cancer soul function can grow and evolve through some of the themes listed here, through establishing ego, dealing with internal security and family dynamics, through the mother energy, through home and roots, through our vulnerable nature, by dealing with our emotional security needs, through forming a personal identity, being able to digest emotional reality, and by being in touch with our personal rhythms. So this brings us to our astrology for the Cancer solar cycle, which is June 20th through July 22nd. Like all cardinal signs, Cancer signals the beginning of a new season. In this case, the sun's ingress into the sign of the crab makes this the summer solstice here in the northern hemisphere. It's also the longest day of the year. And it would be the winter's solstice, or the shortest day of the year in the southern hemisphere. This was historically a huge time of celebration and ritual for all of our ancestors around the globe. In the northern hemisphere, celebrating the return of the light, life, fertility, and the potential for an abundant harvest. Many still celebrate the solstice today in various traditional and modern ways. I personally love a good sun bath at the summer solstice. So, with the eclipses behind us, we are going to have a full moon in the sign of Capricorn on June 24th. You may have seeded something at the last new moon on June 10th, which was also a solar eclipse, that could be coming to a head with this lunation. There may, there also may, there's a lot of harmonious aspects occurring with this full moon that can really support you in making space to claim your own authority or achieve your goals. On July 9th, we have a Cancer new moon and the opportunity to begin cultivating and nurturing a new lunar infused intention. In this solar cycle, we also have Venus moving full speed ahead and changing signs twice. On the 27th of June, Venus moves out of Cancer into the fiery sign of Leo, where passions, creative expression, and romance may ignite. Then into Virgo on the 20th, where we might get a little more discerning and practical when it comes to our values and who and what we love. The other planetary ingress during this time is happening on July 11th when Mercury joins the Sun in the sign of Cancer, imbuing our thoughts and mental processes with more emotion. 4 planets will be changing direction while the Sun moves through Cancer. Jupiter goes retrograde in Pisces right before the Sun moves into Cancer on the 20th, and a couple days later, Mercury, the planet of communications, turns around and goes direct, starts moving forward again. On June 25th, Neptune begins its slow retrograde in its home sign of Pisces, when the planet of dreams and visions slowly moves backwards. Things that were hidden can come to light, and reality can get a little more real when Neptune is retrograde. And finally, on July 15th, Chiron will go retrograde in Aries until December 15th. So, for most of the rest of this year, we may become more introspective collectively and individually as we discover more medicine within. So now let's look at the 4 sun transits occurring during the Cancer solar cycle. Cancer begins on the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, where the sun is at the highest position directly overhead, and temperatures are on the rise. And depending on the region where you live, Cancer can bring much needed water. As fruit and other crops ripen, the delicate spring greens begin seeding out. Winged, scale, and furry families have increased in numbers with all the spring births. In the summer months, these young creatures will now be trained and guided by their parents to become independent before the season ends. The earth and her inhabitants thirst for more water and nutrients as the dry summer heat requires us to gather more water and food to promote maturation and strength. It's time for new plans and initiatives. The sign of Cancer begins a cycle of growth and self realization. June 23rd, the Sun makes a harmonious trine to Jupiter, who has barely budged since it went retrograde on the 20th. This aspect can bring enthusiasm, optimism, satisfaction, luck, radiating love, and opportunities for expansive growth. On July 6th, the Cancer Sun sextiles Uranus and Taurus, stimulating curiosity, innovation, and feelings around liberation. Then on July 15th, the Sun comes to an exact trine with Neptune in Pisces, highlighting dreams and radiating unconditional love. The final Cancer Sun aspect is in opposition to Pluto in Capricorn on July 17th, which can shine the light on responsibilities and what needs more nurturing. So, as the ruling planet of Cancer is the moon, I just decided I was going to show you all the aspects the moon makes through a typical solar cycle. And as you can see, there's like spaces in between. Um, so that's each little section is a day. And that's what the moon is doing in one day. So I'm not going to get into all these aspects. Rather, just going to invite you to feel into this lunar activity. I have 3 slides of these to show you. So this is the lunar activity from June 20th to part of July 29th. And then here we have the rest of July 29th. June 29th through July 10th. Part of July 10th, because the rest of July 10th will begin here, and then this takes us to July 22nd, when the Sun moves into Leo. I will be talking about the lunar phases and stuff later. Just if I was going to talk about each of these aspects, we would be here for days. So let's move on to the other planetary aspects, and we'll begin with Mercury. So Mercury's moving forward in its home sign, and then it makes a square to Neptune and Pisces on July 6th. The same day the Sun trines Jupiter in Pisces. Well, you may be feeling optimistic and limitless. Mental processes could be a bit foggy or confusing with this Mercury aspect. On July 11th, Mercury joins the Sun in the sign of Cancer, and you may get more emotional clarity or insights. Then on July 12th, Mercury trines Jupiter in Pisces, bringing expansive, optimistic feelings and insights. The last Mercury aspect during the solar cycle is a sextile to Uranus and Taurus. This aspect could bring some great intuitive hits on how to free up more personal resources. Venus is by far the most active planet during the Cancer solar cycle this year. On June 21st, Venus trines Neptune in Pisces, which just flows with sweet emotional connection and nurturing unconditional love. On the 23rd, Venus in Cancer opposes Pluto in Capricorn. Old structures that may be breaking down in your life can feel at odds with the desire for peace on the home front. On June 27th, Venus's passions ignite as the planet of love and beauty move into the fiery, expressive sign of Leo. Venus is moving pretty quickly now, so take advantage of the fun that Venus in Leo has to offer. This is a great time for socializing, flirting, and dancing in the streets. On July 8th, Venus in Leo squares Uranus in Taurus, and there could be some unexpected tension or conflict in the areas of relationship or personal resources. On July 21st, Venus moves into the sign of Virgo right before the Sun moves into Leo. Well, the Sun will be illuminating Leo themes. Venus in Virgo will bring practical discernment to matters of the heart. The last planetary transits for this solar cycle are Mars in Leo, opposing Saturn in Aquarius on July 1st, then squaring Uranus in Taurus on July 3rd. Mars in Leo likes to move forward passionately and in full force. So for these few days, you could you could feel a bit frustrated around limitations, delays, or unexpected surprises. So now, let's dive into working with Cancer's ruling planet, the moon. Our ancestors used to garden by the moon. They used to do everything by the moon, actually. But the Farmer's Almanac still uses moon phases for planting and harvesting. According to this timeless wisdom, crops that grow food above ground do best when sown at a new moon or during the waxing phase. And crops that grow their fruit down into the earth or root vegetables do best when planted at the full moon or in the waning phase. We also know that the phases of the moon impact the waters on the earth, including the waters of our bodies. Full moons cause ocean tides to rise. Women's menstruation and human fertility cycles often sync with lunar cycles. We also know that the phases of the moon um, can, well, we don't, we used to, we not know, we used to believe that the full moons caused madness. That's where the word lunacy came from, and there might be something to that a little bit because it does, affect the gravitational pull of the waters of our bodies, and we have waters in our brain. But there have been many studies done concluding that there is an increase of epileptic seizures and bleeding ulcers around the time of a full moon, as well as increased visits to doctors or medical practitioners. Kind of interesting. So, some ancient traditional cultures saw the moon as the main source of life over the sun. And before solar calendars were the main way that people mark time, most folks relied on lunar cycles and phases. The moon has always played a special role in the human psyche for way too many reasons to discuss here. And it still remains a source of magic, mystery, insight, and inspiration. Things that appear to be one way in the light of the day often show us something quite different in the moonlight. In astrology, the moon is associated with all kinds of qualities, including our deepest emotional security needs and how we digest life. And just like the moon itself, these qualities within each of us waxes and wanes through various phases. On this slide, we have an image of the lunar phases along with their degrees. The sun moves around the zodiac over the course of a whole year, whereas the moon moves through the entire zodiac every month. There are two major phases associated with lunar cycles that I spoke a little bit to before. One is the waxing phase, which begins at the new moon when the light is waxing, it grows or increases. And then there is the waning phase, which begins on the full moon when the light wanes or begins to decrease the light of the moon. So, generally speaking, new moons are a good time to set new intentions or plant new seeds, and full moons are a good time to let go or release something that no longer serves you. And while I'm going to give you a brief description of all 8 of these moon phases, along with how you can work with them, there are many ways to activate and increase the lunar energy in your life. Now, if you have your natal chart with your correct time of birth, you can determine your natal moon phase, which can provide deep insights into the workings of your lunar nature. I will show you how to do this in this next slide here. So we have the natal chart of Frida Kahlo. The phases are always determined by the moon's relationship to the sun. So at a new moon, the sun and moon are together. Then the moon begins its journey away from the sun, moving to the waxing crescent, then the first quarter phase, then the waxing gibbous, and so on until it reaches the sun again to begin a new cycle. And for whatever reason, my pointer isn't working on this, so I can't point through it. So it goes counterclockwise. And so at the full moon, the sun and moon are opposite each other. And you can see by the diagram here on the left that 180 to 224 degrees would be a full moon phase. So to determine your natal moon phase, you would find your sun, then measure the degrees from your sun to the moon in a counterclockwise fashion. So we're going to determine Frida's natal lunar phase. And so we find her, and I circled the sun and the moon with the little black circles on the bottom there. Um, so we're going to find her sun is at 13 degrees of Cancer, and her moon is at 29 degrees of Taurus. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the sun and then move around counterclockwise till we get to that moon. So we can see we start at 13 degrees of Cancer, then move to 13 degrees of Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, so on around the dial. And then we get to 13 degrees of Taurus. So that's 10 signs. So each sign has 30 degrees. So to make this simple, I'm not a math person, so I hope I don't confuse anybody with these directions. But if I count 10 signs from the sun to the moon going counterclockwise, that's 10 signs. And so 10 times 30 degrees for each sign is 300. But her moon is at 29 degrees and her sun is at 13. So then we'll take the 29 degrees is the higher number and we'll minus a 13. So that gives us another 16. So then we have the 316. So Frida's natal lunar phase is 316 degrees. So if we look at the chart on the left here, we can see that that is the balsamic or waning crescent phase. So what does that mean? So let's look at this slide. There are many ways to work with these phases, and I am going to offer a perspective that's based off of many of the things that I've studied, including the Jeffrey Wolf Green's evolutionary astrology, combined with more traditional approaches. So the moon, its sign, house placements, aspects, and phases show the type of energy or processes that we use on a daily basis for self-actualization based on our soul's purpose. And it also shows how we distribute the vital energy of our sun. So we create a self-image based on how our moon operates, and the energy you carry in your lunar nativity is key for how you digest and integrate your life experiences into your being. Now, I'm not going to be addressing the signs, houses, or aspects in this video. Rather, we're just going to focus on the phasal energies. If you know signs, houses, and aspects, you can apply what I offer here as another layer. And if you don't know these things and you figured out your moon phase, then you're going to get some great insight into the underlying energies of how your moon operates in your life. If you don't want to apply any of this to your natal chart but are interested in working with lunar phases, then what I share here can be applied to like the current lunar phases and the energy the moon is offering us all. So there's lots of people who work with these, like the cycling phases for whatever they're distributing in their own lives, whatever they're working on digesting, however they're trying to evolve. So like I stated before, the moon is either in a waxing phase or a waning phase. So in the waxing part of the cycle, which would be between 0 and 179 degrees, or from the new moon to the full moon, the moon is considered to be separating from the sun. It's already contacted the sun and now it's separating and finding its own way. So it may be helpful to think of the sun as like source energy or your vital life force, and the moon as a vehicle that's working on distributing that energy. So from the new moon to the full moon, the light is growing. So in the waning half of the lunar cycle, the self is becoming. If you've studied polarity or involution and evolution theory, the waning cycle of the moon would be considered involution, involving the self in matter or bringing the self into form. So then when we get to the full moon, the moon and the sun are right across from each other. The self is fully formed, and we enter the waxing phase. The light of the moon begins to decrease, and then it moves back towards the sun, or some say the energy is applying to the sun. So this would be considered the evolutionary half of the cycle, with the energy more focused on self actualization through transcending the self. So here I've got listed a few keywords for each of the 8 phases that describes the essence of each phase. In the waxing cycle, we begin with the new phase. And the words that I chose were seeded impulse. Now, as already stated, the new moon is about sowing new seeds. It is the beginning of a whole new lunar cycle. Here, the moon is dark and is beginning to grow. This correlates with seeding impulses. At this phase, the energy is instinctual with a desire to explore and respond to what is encountered in the world of matter. The energy moves outwards. During the time of the new moon phase, it is a great energy to plant new seeds based on your desires, just based on your instincts and your impulses, not what you think you need to do, but like what what is driving you right now? What are you feeling into? Especially with a Cancer or a water sign new moon. Um, so if this is your natal lunar phase, this indicates that you are using this energy, forming a self image, and distributing your vital life force through acting on your instinctual impulses as they arise. So the next phase is the waxing crescent, and the words I chose were grapple and develop. So each phase lasts about 3.5 days. So now we're in the waxing crescent phase, about 3.5 days after the new moon. And here the energy turns back within the self, and it's becoming more internal as we begin to grapple with consolidating and digesting within the self what began at the new moon. So here the energy wants to develop, stabilize, and continue to grow. So if I were going to put this into terms of a seed growing, this would be the point where it starts to lay down some good roots and breaks ground. So during the waxing crescent phase, this is a good time to secure the seeds planted at the new moon within the self, feeling into the growth and development. And if this is your natal lunar phase, you actualize more of yourself and vitality through the internal processes of grappling with the struggle of stabilization. And like I'm sure we can all think of things that like life brings us those opportunities. So we all deal with all these phases, but your natal lunar phase is going to be the underlying energy. So then the next part of the waxing cycle is the first quarter, which Jeffrey Wolf Green coined crisis in action. So if you look at the night sky, you're going to see a half a moon at the beginning of this phase. The light has increased, and now the energy moves outwards again. And there's this drive to take action and assert the self. It's through taking action in the world, we bump into that which is outside of the self, which could be other people or circumstances. And just as the plant has broken ground, it now reaches toward the light and expresses its potential based on its environment. It's going to have to contend with circumstances to leaf out and thrive. So the energy of this lunar phase can bring some dilemmas or pressures that are designed to strengthen the growth of your desires based on conscious awareness. Perhaps the conscious awareness of your assets and liabilities. And if this is your natal lunar phase, you increase your vital life force and sense of self through encounters with the outside world. And then finally, we come to the last phase of the waxing cycle, which is the waxing gibbous phase. And the words are adjust and adapt. And so the light of the moon appears nearly whole, yet there is still a need for some refinement. The seed that was sown now has flowers that are attracting the pollinators. The energy turns back inwards, becoming more passive and self reflective in order to make necessary adjustments and adaptations. This lunar phase is a great time to harmonize and readjust to situations or conditions based on what happened the phase before. And if this is your natal lunar phase, your vitality and self image is supported through self analysis and discernment. And then next, we're moving to the full moon, zenith and meeting, and this is the beginning of the waxing cycle. The moon has reached its ultimate light and shines brightly on the earth. It's fully formed now. Still using the seed and plant metaphor, we now have fruit to share. The energy moves outwards once again, and we find great meaning and sustenance by sharing the fruit of our labors. The full moon phase is a perfect time to release something of ourselves out into the world. And if this is your natal lunar phase, you can fuel your life force and become more self actualized through meaningful and balanced relationships with others who are full and shiny in their own right. Okay, the next phase of the waning cycle, we reach the disseminating phase, which is also sometimes referred to as waning gibbous. And the word I chose was assimilation. So now the light of the moon that was fully formed wanes or begins to decrease. The energy becomes more internalized once again, and there is an urge for our creations and our ideas to become more assimilated in the culture that we belong to and what's accepted in that culture. So we start to let go of the self to break free of individual limitations so we can become more integrated into society. Just as the fruit from the plant has been distributed to feed our community, this phase supports our contribution to societal norms. This part of the lunar cycle is a great time to let attachments go, our own personal attachments go, in service to the collective good. If this is your natal lunar phase, you can become more self actualized and vital through sharing your creations and ideas with society. And then we go to the last quarter, which Dane Rudier associated with crisis in consciousness. So the light of the moon is decreasing, and the moon is moving closer to the sun. And we're going to see the other half of the moon now if we look up into the light sky. And we're going back to the plant. It's no longer producing any food. Now there is a pressure to determine how the remaining resources of the plant will be distributed and utilized. Here we come face to face with the realities of our social constructs, the environment that we live in, and the norms of our culture, with a need to determine what our own true values and beliefs are, how we're going to use our energy. So this is often accompanied by a crisis in consciousness if we can no longer go along with the status quo. The last quarter phase is a great time to question and test your values, thoughts, and beliefs and let go of what doesn't support your own personal evolution. If this is your natal lunar phase, your life force and self image are informed through the process of releasing what is not you to align with your soul's truth, which may not line up with the consensus. And then finally, we have the balsamic or waning crescent phase, it's sometimes called, which the word for this is transcendence. So the moon is further decreasing in light at this last lunar phase of the entire cycle. The plant has either turned to seed or has moved into hibernation, leaving only what is essential. The balsamic phase moves the energy inwards once again, and this phase is all about completion, and it's a perfect time for tying up any loose ends, bringing things to a close, surrendering to what's beyond your control, letting go of what needs to go, and then taking a respite from the rest of the world for a little while. So we can all benefit from this energy from time to time. If we get out of our own own way and make room for the divine. And if this is your natal lunar phase, this is where it's at for you. You can self actualize and nurture your vital life force through transcending mundane reality by surrendering the will of the little self. So that covers the moon charts. And then we're going to go back to Frida's chart. So, as stated before, Frida Kahlo's natal lunar phase is balsamic. And if you know anything about her, her life was certainly full of plenty of opportunities to learn how to surrender to something bigger than herself. She had to surrender her own will quite a bit. And she was able to definitely, in so many ways, transcend ordinary reality. I actually find her life and her chart very interesting. Um, just briefly, she was in medical school and on track to becoming a doctor when she had that trolley accident when she was quite young, and that totally changed the course of her life. It was because of her debilitating pain and restriction that she started to take up painting, and she eventually created an entire body of self-portraits that made her famous in her lifetime, and still to this day and probably forever, she used that energy of her moon to transcend not just her will but her whole human life, and she became this transcendent icon. So your lunar phase energy may not be an easy experience per se. In fact, it's likely an ever present energy that can feel challenging and familiar at the same time. Okay, so I just want to share this last lunar phase slide with you in case you want to work with the collective lunar energies that are happening right now during this Cancer solar cycle. So I only have the charts for the new full and quarter moons here. And if you want to include the other phases, you can time it about 3.5 days after each chart, with the exception of the June 20th chart, as that's going to be the end of the first quarter phase. So the waxing gibbous phase actually begins on the 21st. Well, some people use the energy of just the new moon or just the full moon or the new and full moons, which occur about 2 weeks apart. You can get even more juice just by bringing in the quarter phases. So then you'd be working with lunar energy like once a week. So each that phase begins about, the quarter phase happens about a week after the full moon or the new moon. And you can work with all the phases if you really want to fine tune everything about every 3.5 days. So on June 20th, we are coming to the end. That's June 20th is when the Cancer solar cycle begins, and we're coming to the end of the first quarter phase of a cycle that actually began on June 10th with that new moon solar eclipse. So whatever seeds were sown for you or that you planted around that time are now moving through the energy of crisis and action. On June 24th, we're going to have a full moon phase of that lunar cycle, which should be bringing something to us, a state of wholeness, and ready to be shared with the world, or like, the beginning of the letting go process. Then on July 1st, you're going to get to the last quarter, which is crisis and consciousness. Well, you'll have the opportunity to align more with your soul's greater truth by testing your thoughts and beliefs. And then on July 9th, you can begin a whole new lunar cycle by setting a new intention based on your current impulses or desires. And if you want to work with that entire cycle, you can just time it every 3.5 days for all the phases, or a week later to bring to the squares, or 2 weeks for the full moon and new moon, and so on. Well, this brings me to the end of what I wanted to share for this Cancer solar season. If you have any questions about the lunar phases or anything else I presented, please feel free to send me an email at astroenergeticsinfo@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and wishing you and yours many celestial blessings during this Cancer solar cycle.